Welcome back, everyone. In this module's micro lectures, we're going to begin focusing on the specifics as they relate to different drugs and drug groups that we consume. Beginning with the most recognizable to us, over-the-counter and prescription drugs are a routine of our everyday lives. This might be one of the more straightforward discussions of the semester, as you should be the most familiar with these types of drugs and medications, in comparison to things like many illicit harder substances that we will continue to explore this semester. Let's go ahead and get started. When we're talking about prescription and over-the-counter drugs, we're really talking about whether or not there is a physician involved to oversee the use of these medications. Prescription drugs can fall anywhere between Schedule 2 and Schedule 5, Schedule 4 rather, but over-the-counter drugs fall into the Schedule 5 category only. So if you remember earlier in the semester when we discussed drug scheduling, we stated that drugs are scheduled based on their medical recognition. So doctors can prescribe Schedule 2 drugs like morphine and oxycodone for pain purposes, just like they can prescribe Schedule 4 drugs like Xanax for anxiety issues. All prescription drugs must have a prescription from a licensed physician so that they can be dispensed by a pharmacist. Schedule 5 drugs do not need a prescription or doctor's approval, but they can be monitored and do have the possibility of creating complications with other medications. Some of these over-the-counter medications can be quite strong. Think about things like Delsym cough medicine or NyQuil. Those can put you to sleep. If you're already taking a medication that makes you drowsy, these can compound that issue and make your drowsiness worse than you intended. They can also be regulated by the state. Think about pseudoephedrine and how the pharmacist needs to swipe your driver's license at Walgreens if you want to buy something like Sudafed D. They're monitoring and regulating the amount of pseudoephedrine that you can purchase so you don't start cooking methamphetamine in your kitchen. Today, we accept that doctors know what they're doing and that their prescription recommendations will be effective. These prescriptions are verified and approved by the FDA and are considered effective in treating whatever they were designed to treat. However, it was not always this way, and in times in the past, we weren't able to trust our doctors the way that we can now. There are uniform expectations in terms of the treatment and the medications that we receive. However, our trust in our physicians was made more possible due in part to the passage of the Durham-Humphrey Amendment in 1951, and that the government was able to make changes to the structure of pharmaceutical drugs. The Durham-Humphrey Amendment was passed due to government concerns regarding habit-forming drugs and the continued use of patent medicines that were created without any regulation at all. Before this, the only thing that needed to be done was to include the ingredients on the label. But how many people would actually read those when someone was spouting off the wonders of this newly created patent medicine and how great it would be to cure whatever was that ailed you? As the labels were only required to list the ingredients of the medicine, the next step was to make this distinction between those drugs that needed more supervision and those that needed less. Two general categories were born of the new amendment, and for the most part, over-the-counter drugs were considered safer than prescription drugs and therefore need less supervision. But some of the drugs do have the potential to cause some problems for their user, as we stated earlier. We use a lot of over-the-counter drugs, and since there is minimal regulation on a lot of them, we're doing a lot of self-medicating. There is a variety of options out there for us. Whatever ailment you have, there is likely an option for it, as there are over 100,000 different over-the-counter products available. If you have something wrong with you, you can walk into any pharmacy and buy a variety of medications to try and treat your symptoms without having to go to the doctor's office. Headache? Try one of these 19 different pain relievers. We use more over-the-counter drugs than we do prescription drugs, percent-wise. More than half of all medications purchased are over-the-counter drugs compared to prescription drugs. Why do you think that is? The most logical explanation is that not everybody has insurance and not everyone goes to the doctor on a regular basis. So we try and treat it ourselves, and we're spending a lot of money to do it. In 2022 alone, the U.S. population spent more than $41 billion on over-the-counter drugs. In the last few years specifically, we're starting to see a variety of popular medications become over-the-counter drugs. Certain heartburn drugs no longer need a prescription, and erectile dysfunction drugs are also available without a doctor's visit. In 2023, there were actually initial discussions about oral birth control pills becoming over-the-counter drugs. But at the time of this recording, the FDA and the CDC have not passed their final decisions on this prescription to over-the-counter switch proposal. For many of us, over-the-counter drugs are the first choice to treat certain illnesses or injuries, and most of the time, we are able to avoid having to see a doctor. Or perhaps, like millions of people in this country, over-the-counter medications are the only alternative because they have no health insurance and or the ability to afford seeing a doctor. Because people are so reliant on over-the-counter drugs, they may use more than is recommended or may exceed the usual dose in trying to find relief. In general, we aren't as concerned about this overuse because over-the-counter drugs are safer per dose than most prescriptions. The margin of safety for these drugs is really large. As another refresher, what do we mean by the margin of safety? It is the general area between dose and overdose. It would take you a long time before you OD'd on some of these drugs. Some, it may be physically impossible for you to do so. Have you ever heard of someone ODing on NyQuil? No. You might get one hell of a tummy ache, but no ODing for you there. Years ago, it would be considerably more likely when these over-the-counter cough medicines still contained alcohol, but not anymore. What about physical and psychological dependence? Are those possible? For all drugs? It's less likely that there would be a strong physical or psychological dependence, but it is still possible at some level. If you can become physically and psychologically dependent on coffee as you're looking for your next caffeine fix, then it is possible that you might experience low-level dependence, at least on a psychological level, on some of these over-the-counter medications. Think about the sleep aid I have pictured on this screen. If you're taking a Tylenol PM every night before bed because you think it helps you sleep, and then suddenly one night you don't have a Tylenol PM, you might not be able to sleep because you think you need the pill to help you. But really, there is so little active ingredient in one tiny Tylenol that the ability to sleep is really a mental game you're playing with yourself. You think you need the pill, meaning that there is a low-level psychological dependence occurring, but your body is capable of sleeping without the medication for sure. Is this the same type of dependence that heroin would produce? Probably not, but it might be there for some. Those individuals who are likely to abuse over-the-counter drugs are not the same people who are abusing illicit drugs. But habit-forming behaviors for over-the-counter drugs are really not the same as they are for other types of medication. If you begin habitually taking Tums to cure your chronic heartburn, what do you think is going to happen? Well, you might actually cure your heartburn, but the biggest danger is the formation of kidney stones. Tums are nearly pure calcium, and taking that many will likely result in calcium deposits, which may result in kidney stones. So the dangers of over-the-counter drug use are less severe, but nobody wants to get kidney stones, so maybe go see a doctor and get some Nexium for that heartburn. The Durham-Humphrey Amendment to the Food and Drug Act required that certain drugs needed a prescription while others did not. So now we have the first formalized mention of over-the-counter drugs, even though people had been buying everything as an over-the-counter drug for years. This law categorized drugs based on dependency issues. If it was habit forming, it should be supervised by a doctor, meaning it's not safe for self-medication. Or if it was brand new, then it would need to be a prescription drug. This law also allowed for the refill of prescription medications for the first time ever. Many new drugs still fall into this categorization. If it is a brand new drug, then it will require a prescription by default, unless it was designed specifically as an over-the-counter drug. As we mentioned on the previous slide, Nexium will help you relieve the heartburn you're experiencing without those nasty kidney stones that Tums may give you over time. For many years, the purple pill was only available via prescription, meaning you had to go see your doctor, discuss your heartburn, maybe you had to get an endoscopy, they have to see what's going on, and then you go home with your Nexium. But within the last handful of years, Nexium has been available as an over-the-counter drug. It's not the same strength as the prescription version, but it is now available without a prescription. So how does this happen? Well, according to the FDA's switching policy, after so many years as being sold as a prescription strength drug, and if the drug can be shown as successfully treating what it's meant to treat, then the pharmaceutical company can sell it as an over-the-counter drug if they change the formula somewhat and don't make it a prescription level strength. But the FDA must approve the switch from prescription to over-the-counter. This is considered a prescription to OTC switch. After 3 years of prescription status, a pharmaceutical company can then apply for an over-the-counter status. Many drug companies choose to change the strength of the drug and have a prescription version and an over-the-counter version. Then they can make twice as many profits. It also has to be a very popular drug. If they choose to alter the product's formula or strength, the FDA must approve the switch. That may require additional testing depending on what the change or the switch is for. There also can't be a large chance for drug interactions to occur. The doses on a lot of these over-the-counter drugs aren't so high that they could cause a severe drug interaction, but there is still a concern. The good thing about over-the-counter drugs is that they often successfully treat an illness or help mitigate the symptoms without doctor interference. As there is no cure for the common cold, and many of us simply have to tough it out, taking a cough medicine and a decongestant might be the best we're going to get. That doesn't need a visit to the doctor unless the symptoms get any worse. However, how many of us are actually following those dose recommendations? If I'm coughing up a storm, am I taking the time to measure the proper amount of NyQuil into that little cup? Or am I just taking a swig out of the bottle and calling it a day? My headache isn't gone. Am I going to pop 2 more Tylenol? I can't sleep. Maybe I'll pop 2 Tylenol PM and then I'll take some NyQuil. I might not have a headache or a cold, but I'm going to take them anyway. So what's the problem with this? When it comes time to treat the headache or the cough, these medicines aren't going to work as well, and you will simply need a bigger dose. So many people have been using NyQuil to sleep that they've come out with ZQuil, just as a sleep aid. That's a lot of people taking a swig out of the bottle and calling it a day. In this micro lecture, we have specifically focused on over-the-counter drugs and what is the least regulated in terms of consumption and purchase. In the next micro lecture for the module, we're going to turn our attention to prescription drugs. We'll explore the regulation of these products, their potential for abuse, and some of the issues that exist with big pharma corporations.